Welcome back to Texas Liberty Podcast. I'm Clark Patterson, and today is Monday, May the 13th, 2024. And today, along with Ted Brown, we'll be speaking with Michael Rectenwald, who is this year, in fact, this weekend, will be running for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. So we have some great questions, of course, to ask for Michael. But first, let me start, Michael, by asking you about your background in politics and obviously you've made kind of a transition from being a man of the left to towards liberty, whether you want to call that on the right or not.
No.
Right, but definitely being from a man from the left. So yeah, go ahead and tell us about yourself, Michael, and maybe there's some lessons we can learn as to how you made the transition to liberty, and maybe there's some things that we can learn from your own backstory as to how we can spread this to millions of other Americans.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm very happy to be here and to talk about my background and candidacy. So yes, you're right. I was a leftist, far leftist, and I was a professor at NYU for 11 years, and before that at Duke University, and then Carnegie Mellon and Case Western. So I spent about 25, 30 years in academia as a professor, and things got a little rocky for me in 2016 when I began to criticize policies and practices going on at the university, in particular at NYU, but all across the country. And I saw this social justice creed becoming doctrine, becoming policy at the university and across the country. And I thought it was a very pernicious development because what it enshrined was curtailment of speech and the censorship and surveillance even over professors and students through a number of mechanisms that aren't that interesting, but that were part of the university procedures, like a bias reporting hotline and trigger warnings, safe spaces, no platforming of speakers, all of this stuff. I started to criticize, and the administration came down on me like a ton of bricks and basically made my life miserable and untenable at the university, drove me into the Russian department. They put me in the Russian department. I had no affiliation with that department. I like to say they put me in my own personal gulag there. I immediately converted to a civil libertarian because I saw the utmost primacy of individual rights above all else, because without individual rights, we have nothing. There's no common good without individual rights. There's no there's no greater good or any of that without individual rights. So, and then I immediately dived into the political and economic and social philosophy of libertarianism, starting with Ludwig von Mises and working my way through to Rothbard and others, and become very steeped, I think, in libertarian philosophy and theory, and but also politics. And it was a transition. It was like a real sudden gestalt shift, frankly, where you might call it a conversion experience, a kind of Damascus moment, if you will.
And so do you think was it really your own specific circumstances? I mean, if you had a different experience in academia, do you think you still would have looked into Mises and Rothbard and Liberty specifically?
I think so, because I was tending that way anyway. Even as a leftist, I was very independent in my thinking and did not like to be told what to think and to have it prescribed by me. And there was a lot about the left, and in particular Marxist thought, that is very constraining, to say the least. So when I came out of that, it was like being liberated. I felt it quite viscerally. It changed my whole outlook, and I felt freed from the chains of this very oppressive ideology. But I think it's replicable. if that's what you're getting at. I think this is a reproducible experience. Largely, the left will eat its own, but there needs to be somebody to catch it, to catch these leftists when they come falling out of their stupor, if you will. And I think I could do that because I know what they think, how they think, and why they think what they do. And I think I can turn people around from that through a kind of cultural education program. And I have that planned for my campaign in the general election to do a college tour. This is going to be a major component of the campaign.
Great.
Well, Michael, welcome to the show. And I wanted to
Thank
follow
you.
up on that about academia, because obviously, as a professor and all, you would probably know the most about college students than a lot of us would. It's been a long, long time since Clark and I have been in college, I think. So I wondered, what is your take on these the demonstrations regarding the Middle East situation? Because so many, it seems like it's only college students have been involved with those. Students, what is your view about the college students' involvement?
Well, I think they're right about the issue. And, I do think that while this is largely or partly an astroturf movement being funded by so-called philanthropists, it is nevertheless vital that students are permitted to protest and express their views without being arrested or beaten up by the police. And I think it's an unfortunate circumstance that the media and the state propaganda has managed to suggest that they've equated or conflated protests against the war with every other protest that's gone down in the past several years, like the Black Lives Matter and with wokeness in general and all that. Listen, this is a perfect opportunity to meet people where they are, which is around this issue of anti-war, and to bring them into the fold and the full panoply of liberty, the full set of principles that inform the libertarian ideology or philosophy. I think it's more of a philosophy than an ideology. But I think it's necessary to actually not condemn these students and not to encourage their arrest by the police, as some people are doing, which is just terrible, but rather to reach them where they are and show them where they're right and why they're right in this particular case and how they could be right across the board. Like, do they also oppose the proxy war in Ukraine and funding that war? Do they also oppose the possible proxy war with in Taiwan by the U.S. funding Taiwan and arming Taiwan? And do they hold to the non-aggression principle? Can we give them a divining rod that they can use to discern what's right in any particular political circumstance? And this would make them principled. Unfortunately, they're not principled opponents to war. They're circumstantial political opponents to war that is based on a particular being members of a club or a team, whereas they really need to understand why libertarianism opposes war, and how do we get that message out across the world in a principled way that can't be dismissed as woke or what have you.
Right now, as a presidential candidate, obviously, hopefully, you'll have more of a bully pulpit for that sort of thing. Did you go, or did you consider going to visit any of the student protests or student encampments to tell them, hey, I'm a presidential candidate and I'm on your side, or anything like that?
Yes, I did first of all, I did a lot of man on the street interviews in Pittsburgh here. And I went over to the University of Pittsburgh and their encampment, talked to students, talked to them about how I agreed with them about this war, and talked to them about the liberty philosophy and why libertarians also oppose this war and funding and arming Israel to conduct it. And they were very interested because they wouldn't dismiss me as some sort of a crackpot right winger or what have you, because I'm not a right winger, actually. I was canceled by the left, so to speak, and then by the right when I came out against the war of Israel on Gaza and the funding and arming of Israel by the United States and other countries, but especially us, because that's robbery from us, extortion, I got canceled by my publisher and Hillsdale College. So I had a fellowship there. So I've got skin in the game here. That was a good $80,000 worth of annual income that was reproducible. So I think I have the bona fides to oppose war in all circumstances and to speak with some authority about cancel culture and the question of left and right, because I think the libertarian philosophy transcends both.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
That's
great.
true.
Well,
Yeah. Clark,
did you have a follow-up, Ted?
Oh, I was going to say it was a slightly different subject because obviously, Michael, you've been talking about how your intellectual conversion and all. What about, and of course now you're running for president with your newest ideology. I was just wondering, were you involved in politics at all in your previous viewpoints, like into leftist politics and any other political parties, any other political campaigns over the years?
Well, yes. I mean, there's no secret about that. I was actually always anti-war, and as a matter of fact, I ran a website. It was called Citizens for Legitimate Government. Has since turned into CLG News now, and because I said there is no such thing as legitimate government. So, I ran a website. It was and during the Bush administration, that's G.W. Bush. We were very much against the war in Iraq, and I spoke and marched in New York City. I spoke before a massive crowd in New York City about the war. I wrote and we conducted activism to try to stop it, to prevent it, and then to end it once it started. So I've always been anti-war. I was nevertheless, I was still a leftist at that time, and wavered between, being an outright communist and maybe sort of having some involvement as kind of a far left Democratic activist. But I was always disenchanted with the Democratic Party. I thought they were typically hypocritical and sellouts. For example, when Obama got in office, or before he even got in office, he condoned the Bush bailouts, and I was outraged by that. And I said, that's it. I have nothing further to do with this party. And I thought he was a fraud, and I think he was. Not because he used race and rhetoric as a kind of cover for a kind of typical neocon politics, as it turned out. So I knew that was coming, and so I was always a little bit prescient about things like this. And yeah, I've had a lot of engagement. I used to be, for example, when I was a leftist, they used to bring me on to Joe Scarborough's show, Scarborough Country, and sort of routinely beat me up as the token leftist in the room. So, but I called George W. Bush a war criminal on national TV, and said that he was every bit the terrorist that that he was fighting, of the people that he was fighting.
Oh, yeah, indeed he was.
Go ahead, Ted. Go ahead.
Oh, no, Clark, go on. It's your turn.
I was going to say, can you believe that Barack Obama was actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize?
Before he did anything, and then he certainly followed it up with, escalating and increasing wars. I think we're involved in 7 wars during his term, plus drone bombing people. One of them is an innocent, well, I don't know if he was innocent, but a U.S. citizen. I think he was like 18 years old. Unbelievable stuff that he did. It was outrageous. The Nobel Peace Alfred Nobel must be turning in his grave, I guess, unless he's also was a fraud. I don't know.
Well, Obama was the only Nobel Peace Prize winner who bombed another Nobel Peace Prize winner, Doctors Without Borders. That was like a distinct story.
Yes, that's correct. Good point.
So it sounds like then, so you'll definitely be emphasizing foreign policy in your, presidential campaign. And so what other issues, Michael, are you going to be emphasizing once you become the Libertarian Party presidential nominee?
Well, I think the proxy wars are on the top because of the urgency they represent, not because of their primacy philosophically or something. This is a very dire predicament that the U.S. is getting into. As you know, that France is talking about mobilizing troops into Ukraine. And if they get hit or something like that, which they would, then of course we would be involved with a war directly with Russia. I think we already are, but it's technically a proxy war. But I mean, they're using our weapons and intelligence and so forth to conduct this war. That would be one, these wars, the Israeli war, the Ukraine war, and the funding of Taiwan and arming them. And then, of course, the economy would be another one, and the monetary policy, of course. So let's start with the monetary policy. Of course, every libertarian worth his salt would want to end the Fed, but in advance of that, we can encourage the use of parallel alternative currencies like gold, silver, Bitcoin Cash, and Monero to undermine and erode the Fed's money monopoly in the interim. And so that's another prong of my campaign. And on the economic front, also, I would end the regulatory regime, which is crippling the economy and distorting the market, of course, but just crippling the economy. And there's many measures that have been implemented and further ones that are in the pipeline to further erode our economic liberty. And that comes with the climate change catastrophist issue. And also, I think it's going to come down with the WHO pandemic treaty. I'm the only candidate in the race for the presidential nomination who has a very versatile and quite, I think, extensive knowledge of all this stuff. These other threats to liberty, not just the ones posed by our CIA and NSA, Federal Reserve, military industrial complex, but also the censorship industrial complex, the WHO pandemic treaties, the Disease X, the whole slew of crises that they, I think, could come down on us at any time. We need to be ready to handle these and to rebut them and fight them. And that's why I think I'm well positioned, because I've written dozens and dozens of essays and several best-selling books on these topics.
Yeah, well, with that said, presidents of both parties have used crises and even non-crises to increase presidential power at the expense of legislative. And obviously, we saw that during COVID. And I did some research, and over the last 100 years, presidents of both parties have issued over 10,000 executive orders where they just rule by decree. Like FDR and the Japanese, and Carter created FEMA by executive order. And we saw what happened during COVID. I mean, I assume you would advocate less presidential power and more balance of powers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole state needs to be diminished dramatically. So, the thing is, I would use, if I were elected by, some, virtual miracle, I would start by dismantling first of all, the executive office in terms of its incredible number of employees. These would be cut instantly. And also these alphabet agencies, which are just, in the case of the intelligence agencies, are actually oppressive, intrusive, and surveillance agencies, just terrible infringements and oppression. And, in the case of the CIA, they start wars, conduct coups, do experiments on human subjects in the United States. I mean, these people are this is the most evil agency probably ever invented in the history of humanity, maybe other than the KGB, but they're bad. So we don't want a KGB in the United States.
Certainly not. Clark?
Yes, and of course, I think we've been asking all the presidential candidates, of course, about the upcoming convention. I think I might have the minority opinion, But for some reason, just the fact that Donald Trump speaking at the convention, that doesn't really totally terribly concern me. I mean, we've gone 4 years ago from let her speak to now, will he speak? And actually, there might even be, I haven't looked at the latest news, but there might actually be not only Donald Trump, but RFK Jr. So I just thought we'd pose that, since we posed it to all the other, pose that question to you, Michael. What are your thoughts about this coming weekend with, Donald Trump and possibly even RFK Jr. speaking at the Libertarian Party National Convention?
And Vivek Ramaswamy, by the way.
Oh, okay. There's
yeah, there's
will
three.
Will they speak? In 4
Well,
years?
Vivek will be involved in a debate with the
Oh.
VP nominee. Trump will be challenged, hopefully, by the presidential nominee and not a winner of a straw poll. And RFK Jr., I think, will speak on Friday. I've already debated him in the California convention, where I think I showed him the door. And from the Libertarian Party, in other words, my goal there was to make sure this statist, big state government control freak was not at all considered a viable candidate within the Libertarian Party. That would have been a travesty. You might as well just hand over the keys to the car to an authoritarian and let them drive. So I was against all that. I think it's a good opportunity. I know there's a lot of gnashing of teeth about this. I think we frame it properly, use it to our advantage. Don't let it upstage us, but use it as a plank, or I should say, as a platform from which to get our message out to the broader American public. It's an incalculable opportunity. It's a risk. I would like to put it like Dave Smith did. He said it's like throwing a long bomb. It's a long bomb pass. Yes, it could get intercepted, but every risk is a risk. I mean, every major move like this involves some risk, but I think it's a risk worth taking.
Right. Well, I'm inclined to disagree with you on that a bit, but I did want to follow up on what you said about having the presidential candidate be in place to rather than a straw poll winner. Would you favor then moving up the presidential nomination to be pretty much the first item of business at the convention instead of waiting several days before doing that?
I would like to move it up till Saturday afternoon or somewhere around there, so that the nominee is already in place by the time Trump speaks, and then it's the nominee that addresses Trump rather than the straw poll winner, which would be a tilt the delegate process and the election process toward that person. I don't think that's fair, because the winner of that might not be the same as the nominee because we use round voting. So we have different rounds of voting, and it's not necessarily the first round that decides the candidate.
Oh, that is so true. You haven't been to other previous libertarian conventions, but it just goes on and on and on, and the voting takes so long, and it's very, very frustrating. So
yeah, I'm
even
prepared for that. Yeah,
even if you started on Saturday.
I think it should start on Saturday and end on Saturday, so that it's done before Trump takes the stage, so that we're not like, well, here's Trump, but we don't know who our guy is. That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. I'm just thinking that just cynically that even if we start on Saturday morning, will we have the candidate? I hope so, of course. But none of the candidates for secretary seem to have a faster way of counting ballots. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But now, I did want to bring up another subject, and of course, another major issue, and maybe we're probably in disagreement on this one. And I'm running for U.S. Senate in Texas, so it's a big issue down here, and that's on the immigration issue. Yeah. And you had mentioned about how bad and evil our government is, and of course, the other countries have even worse. I mean, it's like a low bar, but ours is probably one of the best ones compared to what other people around the world have to suffer with. Yeah. And my view is that people from these hellholes should be able to come here to find a better life. And I just wanted to follow up with you then about, I'd heard your view might be a bit different on that.
It's a little bit different. I do think that people that are in those hellholes, those statist asylums and oppressive regimes, should have the opportunity to move here. And I think That's one of the things that is driving the immigration, which I would call a crisis because of the humanitarian issue that it involves. So, you all know what the causes of all this are. They have to do with the interventionism of the United States that's displaced people, has to do with the war on drugs, which has created cartels that then, service these black markets in drugs. And I think that has to end. I think the interventionism must end. This would take the pressure off the border, I believe. And also, of course, the trade restrictions that have hampered, these countries from becoming sufficient to having sufficient producers to employ people where they live. I think people effectively want to live where they're growing up, where, people have a pride of place. This is not nationalism. This is love of place. That's a perfectly natural human sentiment. And I think there's a difference between the state, a nation state, and the country, So I'm not to skirt your question at all. I do believe that that's true, but I think it should be conducted in a privatized way rather than having the state in charge of it. And that is private invitations, private companies and people inviting people in and vouching for them and supporting them if necessary. Because look, there's people coming up here sleeping on the streets. This is no better than where they came from. And I think that's a humanitarian crisis. And then I also think people are being smuggled. And that's a crime. So that all has to end, and we need to have a rational, deliberate policy. And I don't think that straight up open borders is the right way, because I think you then have the problem of public property being basically run by the state, which I don't think they should run it. I think citizens should run it because they're rightful owners of it. And likewise, I think an invitation-based system. This doesn't mean everybody has to have their name specifically. They don't have to be invited by name or anything. A company says we need X amount of people, we will sponsor them, et cetera, bring them in. And this is much more rational and supportive. And I also think the social welfare to immigrants should be cut. I don't think that we should be incentivizing artificially immigration through social welfare payouts in the form of free hotels, credit cards, debit cards loaded with cash, and otherwise, cell phones and things like that. This is a duping of these poor people. It's baiting them in under the wrong auspices, I think, under the wrong impression about what it is here to do, what it is to live here. I think we should have a free market in immigration like we have in everything else.
Right. Well, the last part, follow up on that. I mean, I think the welfare part is because they won't let them work. I mean, they can't get a work permit. And what's the logic of that? I mean, I think
makes no sense.
Right. Anybody within the bounds of this country should be able to seek work.
Absolutely.
I mean, even a tourist who's here for a couple of weeks and needs some extra money should be able to pick up a shift or something. Why should the government decide who can work? Yeah, and that would solve most of the problem there if these guys could start working immediately. Yeah,
absolutely. These work permit requirements are outrageous, and that should be ended, and allow people to work who want to work, and people that come here. I think mostly do want to work. I don't think they want to sit around on social welfare payouts. I think they actually want to work, and they want to have what's been understood as the American dream, which is slipping away from all of us, but it can be restored.
Great. Okay. And as we're winding down to about 7 minutes, gentlemen, let me turn to the subject that I've discussed with some of the previous LP presidential candidates, and something, of course, you've written about at length, Michael, and that's the whole social justice movement. I mean, I'm on record as saying that 2 to 3 or 4% that the LP gets pretty much every couple of years in federal and state elections is pretty accurate. And the reason I think that is because so many Americans, both left, right, and center, have adopted the social justice idea that, wealth is finite, and wealth is, instead of being created through freedom and rights, it's all oppression. Whites are wealthy, we're all three white males here, and it's, the average American, or too many Americans, a large majority think that that's because of oppression or racism or
exploitation, racism.
go. And it's not about freedom, no rising tide lifting all boats.
Yeah.
And I know you've written about this at length, Michael. And so what are your thoughts? How can we, obviously, academia needs to change those fundamental ideas. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, going back real quickly to the academia needs to change, I agree. The best way to change it is by cutting all federal funding to all academic institutions, because it encourages this kind of statism. And it's why we have all these leftist authoritarians running academia. They're rent seekers who don't want to compete in the marketplace. So, and I know this very well, because, that's the motive for a lot of these people to become academics. They just want to they want to be immune from the marketplace. And I think, between you and me, all tenure should be cut out. That's a nonsense notion. It's a feudal, medieval notion that you have a guaranteed job. That's nonsense. That I would say the way to defeat this social justice is by taking it on at the premises, which are effectively coming out of Marxism, that, look, the capitalist class is the evil class. They're the exploiters. They're robbing people at the point of production. Every worker is ripped off by definition. This is all nonsense coming out of Marx's adoption of the labor theory of value, and his belief that value is the sum total of labor embodied in a commodity. This is nonsense. Everybody knows that value is a subjective thing. So once you knock down the labor theory of value and the exploitation theory, then you see who is the real exploiter. It's not capitalists. Now, those that are in collusion with the state, they are exploiters. They become, monopolies are exploiters because they can charge more money for less valuable goods, and they can pay less money for labor. But in theory, though, I mean, in a pure sense, under pure capitalism, there's no exploitation like that. So I would point them to the state as the real exploiter. Who can take your money effectively by force or the threat of force without any agreement at all? You didn't agree to this. Nobody signed the social contract. I didn't sign any social contract. There's no implicit or explicit social contract. So it's nonsense. And the idea that this zero-sum game thinking that socialists and social justice people believe in is false. In other words, you're right. A rising tide lifts all boats. Just because somebody's rich, that's not what makes you poor. Okay, somebody being rich doesn't make you poor. That's not true. In fact, the greater wealth production that we have, i.e. the more capital, the more wealthy everybody gets. And that's just a fact. And it's been proven historically. I mean, Javier Milei gave a great speech at the World Economic Forum, which laid it out perfectly about the huge curve, the L curve that happened when industrial capitalism was inaugurated. It increased the standards of living immeasurably for across the board. So, that has to be made clear. And I think I'm the guy to do that in this setting.
Well, you've certainly written a number of books on these topics, Michael. And so, I think you'd be the perfect person to show that the only oppression, or most oppression and exploitation, comes from the state. So,
exactly.
So
who's the real? They produce nothing. The state produces nothing and takes your money. I mean, what is this?
Well, gentlemen,
what is its product?
We're coming down to the last 2 minutes, so
I'm
going to give the vast, the lion's share of that to you, Michael. Just tell us where people can where you want people to find you, and your social media accounts and such.
All the social media accounts except for Facebook are Wreck the Regime, at Wreck the Regime, REC the Regime. Our website, the campaign website, is also wrecktheregime.com. And you'll find out what I mean by wrecking the regime. I'm not talking about destroying society. I'm talking about knocking down, like Javier Milei said, these pillars of the state.
There you go. There you go. Okay, great. Well, listen, Michael, thanks so much for doing this interview with us. We'll have this up. This episode should drop by tomorrow morning. I know, of course, in Europe, where Ted is, that's going to actually be tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon. But I will send you an email, and of course, your assistant Lori an email. And
Thank
so,
you.
we'll
put it on the site.
Okay, great. That's what we want to hear. And
Yep.
I think I misspoke earlier. The actual Libertarian Party convention is not this weekend.
No, that's this weekend. Yeah,
it's the weekend after, so we actually have a little more time.
You scared me a little bit. No,
I know. Scared myself. So let me just close out, gentlemen, by reminding our listeners that tyranny exists when the people fear the government. Liberty exists when the government fears the people. So go out and show the government you're not scared. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.